Good evening. We're in 2 Kings still, and still in the times of Elisha. In this study that we got, they also linked Obadiah with this, and there's a reason for that. Obadiah is the shortest of the minor prophets, and the prophecy of Obadiah has to do with Israel's destruction of the Edomites. So that's a reason that that's kind of included. But that has kind of an issue because we don't really know what time frame Obadiah was really talking about. So because there's several different conflicts that Israel had with the Edomites. Actually, there was a long series of conflicts Israel had with the Edomites. The Edomites are Esau's descendants. So it all goes back to Abraham. So, all the ites, right? All the ites, the Edomites, Hittites, Perizzites, Israelites, all Semites, all related, okay? Through Esau, Ishmael, all them other descendants that we don't follow the lineage of, all those nations rose. So they're all related, essentially. That kind of has an interesting start on this tonight. It's Elisha. Actually, there's like 3 parts to this chapter, and when you start reading a book like Kings or Chronicles, 1st, 2nd Chronicles, 1st, 2nd Kings, they're really kind of historical texts. So a lot of times you'll get like little snippets of, this and this and this. I don't necessarily have to flow, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we kind of get into the later part of this. But this goes back to the woman that he had stayed with. Elisha spoke to the woman whose son he had restored to life. You remember that story? We went through that story. Where the son had died, the son of the husband, and she got the son in her old age, and the son died, and Elisha came back and raised the son to life. And he said, "Arise and go into your household and sojourn wherever you can sojourn, for the Lord has called for a famine, and it will even come on the land for 7 years." So basically, he gave her kind of a heads up, And so the woman arose and did according to the word of the man of God. And she went with her household and sojourned in the land of the Philistines 7 years. And at the end of 7 years, the woman returned from the land of the Philistines. She went out to appeal to the king for a house and for her field. So basically, Elisha said, there's going to be a famine, you need to leave. So she did. So she went to the land of the Philistines. So she went to the land of the Philistines for 7 years. And she came back, and somebody else was living in her house and had her land. That's kind of the crux of this story. So she wanted it back. She wanted that back. And under Jewish law, that was something that you could request. That land would come back to you. That's another long lesson, but basically that land, if it was in your household, it kind of had to stay in your household, and the law provided for that. So it's not like land today. The law kind of protected it into the household that it was. That was part of the allotments and how that worked out, and God had provided for that. So she wanted it back, and the king was talking with Gehazi. Now, you remember Gehazi? He's the servant of Elisha that went and took the money from Naaman, and Elisha put the leprosy of Naaman on Elisha. So the question becomes now, how come is Elisha, who would be a leper, in the presence of a king? So there's 2 or 3 different ways to look at this. Actually, I had to do some studying on this. There's 2 or 3 ways to look at it. One thing is that this isn't chronological. In other words, this was before the leprosy of Naaman had come upon Gehazi. And in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, things aren't always super chronological. So that's a possibility. But the other thing, so I started trying to figure this out, because leprosy under the law wasn't that you were unclean, but you could become clean because the law provided for that. It said if you were a leper and you became clean, you could go to the priest and he could certify that you were clean, and you went outside of the camp for 7 days, then you could come back into Israel. Well, the leprosy that we know of today, which actually is called Hansen's disease, is not curable at that time. It is curable today. But it was not curable at the time, well, until antibiotics. So, that hasn't been that long, right? Um, but Hansen's disease, which is what we call modern day leprosy today, it didn't exist in the Middle East at the time of the Old Testament, interestingly enough. So leprosy in the Old Testament meant a skin disease. Now that could have been like a severe skin disease, but a contagious skin disease. So just because you had leprosy, if it was white, according to the law, you were still clean. So just because you had a skin disease didn't mean that you were unclean. But if you had certain skin diseases, which I don't know what them skin diseases were, I know they could be fatal. I know that. But they weren't what we would consider, which I found was very interesting. I've read the Bible. I've been in the Bible my whole life, and I always just thought leprosy in the Bible was leprosy like we think leprosy, Hansen's disease. But I read 4 or 5 articles by 4 or 5 very smart people that wrote books about this, and they said that did not exist in the Middle East in those days. And in the Hebrew, there was no word for skin disease. The word was leprosy. So it's possible that even though he had leprosy, if it was white, he was still considered clean and can be in the presence of the king. That was a possibility. So I found that kind of interesting myself. Might be the most interesting thing I have to tell you tonight. But anyway, but I thought that was pretty neat. So he was relating the king how he had restored to life the one who was dead, which was the woman's son. And the woman, his son restored to life, appealed to the king for the house and for her field. And Gehazi said, "My lord, O king, this is a woman, this is her son, whom Elisha restored." And the king asked the woman, she related it to him. So the king appointed for her certain officers, saying, "Restore all that was hers, and all the produce of the field from the day that she left the land until now." So that was quite a deal. I mean, that's a lot, 7 years. All the produce of the field from the day she left until now. So he really gave her more than what she wanted. Because he respected Elisha, he respected Gehazi, but he respected Elisha, but apparently not enough to follow what Elisha said to do, which was kind of interesting, but it kind of shores up Elisha's reputation. Then Elisha came to Damascus, and Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, was sick. So these are the Syrians. Syrians are a different group. So Philistines are a different group. Philistines came across the Mediterranean. Philistines were seafaring people. They weren't part related. So Syrians are a different group. So this is the same guy that Elisha said, "Open their eyes," and they saw the chariots of fire, and he took them to the blind. This is the same king, Ben-Hadad. So Ben-Hadad, he was sick, and so he sent a guy. The man of God has come here. So interestingly, this is Elisha, who he had fought, who he had wanted to capture, who he had probably wanted to kill. But he sent his servant, Hazael, take a gift in your hand, go to meet the man of God. Very interesting, same idea. Take something, give him something, inquire the Lord by him, saying, "Will I recover from the sickness?" So he wanted to know. So he's going to send this to Elisha so he can get an answer. So Elisha, and this is setting us up for this battle, setting us up for what will happen. It says, Hazael went to meet him, took a gift in his hand, even every kind of good thing of Damascus, 40 camel loads. And I studied that a little bit about how much that was. And I guess a camel can carry up to 1,200 pounds, interestingly enough. That's what I found out. And but they said, what I read, was that generally when kings did that, they never load the camels very heavy. They just sent a lot of camels with a little bit because it looked more impressive, right? It was a bigger caravan, in other words, right? The bigger the caravan, the better it looks. So they didn't really load the camels that heavy, but still a lot of stuff, right? Sent a lot of stuff to him. Going to send it over to him, and he's going to ask him this question. Elisha says, go say to him, you will surely recover, but the Lord has shown me that he will certainly die. So a very weird prophecy, right? You're going to recover from the sickness, but you're going to die. And then Elisha goes on to say, he says, He fixed his gaze. I thought this was an interesting verse. He fixed his gaze steadily on him until he was ashamed, and the man of God wept. I thought that was a really interesting verse. So he looks at him because he's saying this prophecy, and then I guess he just stares at this guy until the guy's ashamed because he's staring at him, because I guess Elisha knows the heart of this man, and this man might not even know the heart of his self yet. And then Elisha wept because God had revealed to Elisha the evil that would come upon Israel by the hand of this man. This is really an interesting prophecy, an interesting idea. God knowing, and yet God allowing. See, we wrestle with that, don't we? I do. I think maybe we all wrestle with that a little bit. You know, God knows, and yet God allows. And I think that's something we struggle. Even in Christianity, we struggle with that concept. God knew this man, and here he is right in front of Elisha. Here he is in the heart of Samaria, right in front of Elisha. Elisha knows this man is the one that's going to kill all these Israelites. He's going to bring war. He's going to bring all this terrible stuff upon Israel. And yet Elisha knows that he has to let this guy go and do exactly what he's going to do. You see, that's difficult. Why didn't he just kill this guy, right? Why didn't he just do away with this guy? In other words, why did he let this guy go back and he knows he's going to do this evil? See, that's the real kicker with God in Christ. And, you know, we never see the big picture, ever. We never see the whole picture. We just see our perspective, our piece of the picture, our piece of the puzzle. That's all we ever really see. And we have to have faith that God sees a lot more than we see. God sees a bigger picture. How to say this in the right way. Any questions? Anybody know where I'm going with this? Yeah, well, you're right. Yeah. Yeah. David what? No, David didn't take Saul's life when he could have many times. Huh? Yeah, he let God work his way. Absolutely. Yeah. For me to pray to save my life, and then for me eventually, because my life was spared, maybe by an accident or whatever, I would take somebody else's life. See, that would be, I can't see that. I can't see. You see, you can't see. You don't know. And in a way, there's some comfort in that because there's some providence in that. And I think that's a different idea. Providence is a different idea than predestination. But I think that well, not necessarily. But this guy that's going to kill thousands, tens of thousands of Israelites is right there in front of his face, and he knows he's going to do it. I mean, he knows he's going to do it. So if you're the prophet, what would you want to do? You would want to what? If you knew he was going to do that, what would you want to do? You'd want to stop him, right? Whatever that meant. Either you would want to kill him or you would want them to kill him. But at the same time, God's not saying that's not your mission. That's not what you're to do. You're to let this play out. Okay. Well, Elisha is the prophet. So Ben-Hadad's the king of Aram, which is Syria, basically. And Hazael is the guy that Ben-Hadad has sent to ask Elisha the question, am I going to recover? So this guy Hazael is the one is the king going to recover? Right. Will I recover from this sickness? He wants to know. The king has sent Hazael to Elisha to ask Elisha, well, am I going to get well or not? That's what he sent Hazael to do. That's Hazael's job. He's supposed to go to the Elisha, go to the prophet, and say, am I going to get well from this or not? And then come back and tell Ben-Hadad, you're going to get well, or you're not going to get well, you're going to die. And that, in the Old Testament, that happened a lot. People asked prophets, am I going to die? That was a big thing. So, but Elisha knows, and so Elisha gives a really weird prophecy. He says, you're going to get well. Tell the king he'll get well, but he's going to die. See, Elisha knew Hazael's heart better than Hazael knew his heart. And Hazael says, why does my Lord weep? And he answered, because I know the evil you will do to the sons of Israel. Their strongholds you will set on fire, and their young men you will kill with the sword, and the little ones you will dash in pieces, and the women with child you will rip up. That's why he cried, because the Lord had told him that's what this Hazael is going to do, right? That's what you're going to do. So Hazael said, what is your servant, who is but a dog, that he should do this great thing? And Elisha answered, the Lord has shown me that you will be king over Aram. So, Elisha in this prophecy, he knows what will happen. So Hazael is going to go back to the king, and he tells the king what Elisha said. He says, you would recover. That's what he said mostly, right? Part of it. He says, you will recover. And on the following day, he took the cover, dipped it in water, spread it on his face so that he died. So Hazael became king in his place. So Hazael killed him. So Elisha's prophecy was right. He says, you will recover, but you're going to die. Because Hazael killed him and took over as king, interestingly enough. And historically, archaeologically, this was the king from nowhere, the king that had no lineage, shouldn't have been king. King that somehow he managed to be king. He shouldn't have really been king. And archaeologists have found reference to this particular king because he kind of usurped the authority of Ben-Hadad. And he is going to make war against Israel. And he is going to kill a lot of Israel. So in the 5th year of Joram, so now that's the second story. So the first story was the widow, okay, and the widow getting her land back. The second story was Ben-Hadad, Hazael, and the prophecy of Elisha that Hazael is going to come back and kill a lot of Israelites through war because he's the king of Aram. That's the second story. Now, go to the third story. So there's 3 stories. There's 3 sections of 2 Kings 8. So the third story starts with this. In the 5th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, king of Israel. So this is Joram is the king of Israel now. So, okay. So y'all know Ahab and Jezebel, right? We know Jezebel. Everybody knows Jezebel, right? Jezebel's husband was the king of Israel. Jezebel was not the queen of Israel. Well, she was essentially. But Ahab, like the pirate, let's always remember him, not the pirate, the whale guy. Moby Dick, yeah. Ahab was Jezebel's husband. And Ahab's son is Joram. So Ahab, that time has passed. And now Joram is the king in Israel, which is the northern tribes, not Judah, okay? And Jehoshaphat is still the king of Judah. So now Jehoram, so there's 2 guys here, their names are very similar. Joram is Ahab's son. He's the king of the northern tribes, Israel, okay? He's that king. And then I got lost. And then Jehoram is the son of Jehoshaphat, which was the king of Judah. So the kingships have changed. That's why that's in here. The kingships have changed now. Joram and Jehoram are the 2 kings. But now, he was 32 years old. He reigned 8 years. So he reigned 8 years in Jerusalem. because Jerusalem's still the capital of Judah. He walked in the way of the kings of Israel. What that means is that he doesn't follow God, because the kings of Israel do not follow God, just as the house of Ahab had done. For the daughter of Ahab became his wife. So Jehoshaphat's son Jehoram married the daughter of Ahab. So there was intermarriage there. Northern, southern tribes. I'm doing my best here, people. Doing my best, right? So that, and she corrupted him. That's basically what this text is saying. His wife corrupted him. She was Ahab, so he was living like the Israelites, the northern tribes, but he's in Judah. Remember, there's separation now. He's in Judah, okay? So Judah's not following God the way they should. Everybody up to speed? Everybody know that? Oh yeah, that was way back. Yeah, we're way past the law here. You know, we're hundreds of years past the law. Yeah, never stopped them, but I mean, this is getting up there, like 8th century BC. Probably more like, more like 6th century probably actually. Assyria carried the northern tribes off in 520 BC. So it's 520 BC when Israel basically ceased to exist. The Assyrians came in and took them all away, carried them off. We call them the lost tribes, never to be heard of again. And then in 486 BC, because you got to remember we're BC, we're going backwards, right? So 520 is further away, like zeros here. So 520, the Assyrians carry off Israel, and then 486, we're moving closer to zero, right? 486, the Babylonians carry off Judah in 486. So we're probably about 6th century BC here. And so anyway, he's not doing what he should. However, the Lord was not willing to destroy Judah for the sake of David. See, we're fighting two different wars here. I guess I should explain that. Fighting two different wars, okay? Jerusalem, Judah, which is that area right around Jerusalem, nobody really wants that, okay? Because it's rocky and it's hilly and it's not farmland and it's not pasture land and it's not. That's how come Judah survived longer than Israel. Not because the Syrians could have took Judah too, but they didn't really want it, okay? It was that old rocky ground like out here in these hills that nobody really wants, right? Nobody wanted it. So basically, Aram, the Syrians, okay, Ben-Hadad and Hazael, that story we were talking about, those are the Syrians. Aram, a lot of times says the Bible, those Syrians, and they were going to destroy and kill Israel, right? Northern tribe Israel, not Judah. That's one battle, okay? Syrians and Israel. Because Israel is going to be carried off by the Syrians eventually. That's going to be their demise. That's one war. That's north of Jerusalem. North. Across the Jordan, north of Jerusalem. But then right across the Jordan from Judah, should have brought a map, is Edom. And the land of Edom is 15 miles wide and 70 miles long. That's the land of Edom. 15 miles wide, 70 miles long. We're not talking about big geographical areas here. This isn't like World War II. This is like here to Tulsa. Okay, so that's the Edomites. That's the descendants of Esau. So now you got to shift. So before we were talking about Aram and the Syrians and Israel. Now we're going to be talking about Judah and Edom. That's another battle. Okay, so there's two different wars going on here, essentially. So, however, the Lord is not willing to destroy Judah. This is a recurring theme. You know, why? Because Judah is the lineage of Jesus, and if you go back to 2 Samuel 7, you have to have a king on the throne of Judah. Even through Babylonian captivity, there was a king of Judah, which was really interesting, because when the Babylonians came in to take Judah, instead of killing the king, which is what they would have done, they punched his eyes out. They drug him back to Babylon. And when the Medes took over from, okay, so you got the Babylonians. The Babylonians, they wanted to make everybody Babylonians. They assimilated people. If you ever watch Star Trek, they're like the Borg. They assimilated people, right? They wanted to make them Babylonians. That's what happened to Daniel, see? That's how come Daniel was a prophet, or Daniel was in Babylon, because Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they took all the best and the brightest and the most wonderful, and they carried them back to Babylon, and they changed their names. They gave them Babylonian names. If you read the book of Daniel, it's all in there. They fed them Babylonian food. They tried to make them good little Babylonians and help to improve their empire. But then, when Babylon fell to the Medes and the Persians, was really a God thing, because the Medes and the Persians were so powerful that when they came to Babylon, which is a huge nation, Babylon, I mean, you're talking, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon is one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Babylon was amazing. But when the Medes and Persians came to Babylon to override it, the Babylonians just opened the gates of the city and just laid down their weapons and just let the Medes come in. They never fought them. So nobody got killed. Nothing was ever destroyed. And the Medes came in, and the Persians came in, and Xerxes, King Xerxes, and if you read Ezra and Nehemiah, they were serving under the Medes and the Persians. The Medes and Persians said, if you want to go home, go home. They weren't like the Babylonians. They weren't trying to assimilate people into their nation. So when the Medes came in, the Medes and the Persians said, if you want to go back to where you came from, then just go back. So Ezra and Nehemiah gather up and head back to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple and rebuild the walls. And guess what? There's still a king on the throne of Judah. Because there has to be. Because they were only in captivity for 71 years. That's the prophecy of Jeremiah. So there has to be a king. So there's still a king on the throne of Judah. And that kingly lineage can be traced all the way to Christ. I'm really working hard here tonight. And I don't know if y'all are enjoying this or not, but I'm doing the best I can. So anyway, that goes all the way to Christ. So that's the reason that that's the reason the Lord was not willing to destroy Judah. Okay? That's the reason Israel, he didn't care about Israel, basically, because Israel didn't matter in the crux of it. Because once you got to the prophecy of David in 2 Samuel 7, that put the promise of Abraham of Jesus Christ to the lineage of the tribe of Judah, and specifically to the lineage of David. So you can't mess with that. So Israel disappears. Okay? Never to come back. The lost tribes. But Judah, and not forget the tribe of Benjamin, because there's still Benjamites that exist in the tribe of Judah. God's going to maintain them as a nation all the way until the time of Christ, because that's the prophecy. So that's how. Does that make sense? So now, and that's what he says. He had promised him to give a lamp for the sake of David, his servant, since he had promised him to give a lamp to him through his son always. In his days, Edom revolted. So this is the other war. Edom revolted from under the hand of Judah and made a king over themselves. So Edom was under Jehoshaphat. Edom was suppressed. Edom was still a nation, but Jehoshaphat set their king and basically was over them. But when his son Jehoram took over, they decided they wasn't going to do that anymore. They weren't going to play that game anymore. So they made their own king. So Jehoram, the king of Judah, says, we'll go over there and teach them Edomites a lesson, right? Because they need to be doing what they said they were going to do and honor that agreement that they had with my father, Jehoshaphat. I love saying the name Jehoshaphat. I'm so sorry he's dead now. We can't talk about him much anymore. But nevertheless, and it says, then so he said, in his days, okay, and then Joram crossed over to Zair and all his chariots with him. Now this is Joram. This is the Israelite king. And he rose by night and struck the Edomites who had surrounded him and the captains of the chariots and his army fled to their tents. So this goes back to that idea that they're still connected, and so Edom apparently attacked Joram, attacked Israel, and Joram tried to fight them, but it didn't work out good. They all went back to their tents. They couldn't hold up against them because the Lord wasn't with them, and the Lord was not going to be with them because it was close to the time of their demise. Elisha was a prophet who prophesied to a dying nation. Elisha wept because Elisha knew that those people would not listen to him and would not believe him. And to be honest with you, when I read that particular passage, I think of Jesus when he raised Lazarus. I think of Jesus weeping, because I think Jesus knew the same thing. He knew that for all he did, even to raise someone from the dead, that people, for the most part, were not going to believe on him, and that more would be lost than would be saved. You know, God, what makes God weep? I mean, lost souls, right? And the truth is that there's more people lost than there are saved. So I think there's a real parallel in the passage between Jesus, and a lot of people don't agree with me on why Jesus wept, and that's okay. You don't have to. But, I think for Jesus to say Jesus just wept simply because he was grieved that Lazarus had died is a real oversimplification of the text. I mean, there was a lot more going on in the mind of Jesus than Lazarus being dead in the tomb. Matter of fact, I think he was touched. I think he was touched by their sorrow. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think he was touched by their sorrow. But over and over, he was told the same thing, wasn't he? By Mary, by Martha, by the people there. If you'd have been here, he wouldn't have died. And I think over and over, Jesus was like, you don't know me. You spent all this time with me. Oh, I think he weeps over us. That's right. Psalms. Yeah. I think he was definitely touched by their sorrow. But I really think there was a lot more going on with him than just that, in my mind. Yeah. Yeah. Well, Jesus was compassionate, on many occasions in the scripture, not just there. He was touched a lot of times by people that were, even the widow's son. I always think of that miracle we'd hardly ever look at. Such a short little miracle, the going into the town and the son was dead, and the widow, and he went and healed the widow's son. And, that was just compassion. I think that was just a compassionate healing. I don't think that, and how many people did Jesus heal? How many people did Jesus heal? There's no telling. We have a little bitty bit, it says they were bringing him to him. They were letting him down through the roofs. They were, they were touching his garments as he walked through the way. They were, Jesus healed thousands of people probably. And we just have a little bit, we don't see it all. And a lot of that was just compassion, But when God would say, the bad thing about that is something that often goes through my little pea brain mind is that, he undoubtedly watched his earthly father, die. Joseph was undoubtedly dead by the time he was on the cross, so there was a lot of, I think that's one of those things. He watched him die, but yet nothing, couldn't do anything. I don't know, a lot of stuff there. I'm getting off track, but I don't know. There's a lot to it, a lot more than we think about, God's dealing with man and Christ dealing with man, and in this case, God had turned from Israel. Edom revolted against Judah to this day. The rest of the acts of Joram, all they did, they're not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings. So Joram slept with his fathers, was buried with his fathers in the city of David, which is Jerusalem. And Ahaziah, his son, became king in his place in the 12th year of Joram. the son of Ahab, king of Israel. Ahaziah, the son of Jehoram, king of Judah, began to reign. Ahaziah was 22 years old, and he reigned 1 year. Yeah, some of them were really, really short. It was a short lifespan to be a king. It wasn't always great to be king in the land of Judah. I'm telling you that right now. And his mother's name, and that's just historical information. He walked in the way of the house of Ahab, so still not turning. When you talk even about Judah, there were only really two good kings in Judah, and that was Josiah and Hezekiah. All the rest of them were just as bad as the Israelite kings. It says, then he went with Joram, the son of Ahab, to war against Hazael. So they both go to fight the king of Aram. And the Arameans wounded Joram. So the king Joram returned to be healed. And then Ahaziah, the son of Jehoram, the king of Judah, went down to see Joram in Jezreel because he was sick. So, I mean, it's just a lot of historical stuff, but it kind of gives you a basis later on for what happens in the Bible. You know, there's an Old Testament basis to what happens in the New Testament. Old Testament stuff is important. It does matter. The relationships that were going on at the time of Christ, a lot of that came back to this particular time. This was influencing on Judah and on what they did, what they believed, how they worshiped. Obadiah, short book of the Bible. Obadiah is about Israel's defeat of Edom. But like I said, you can't really put it in terms of, it's hard to say this was a particular time it was talking about, because there was about 4 major times that it could have been Obadiah could have spoke, but Obadiah is not dated. There's nothing in the book of Obadiah to date the book of Obadiah. So, and it's the shortest minor prophet. So there's no way really to specifically date it to this particular time frame. So anyway, any questions? I'm doing the best I can with tough material here, people. Oh yeah, continual. Well, they were fighting for land, territory, you know, mostly. Well, they was trying to keep what was given to them, you know. I mean, the truth is, and that was their pretense, was that, you know, God gave us this is ours. Why do you think they're still fighting in the Middle East? You know, because the Jews say, God gave us this land, so we have a godly right, a godly fight to fight the Muslims. And the Muslims are saying, you know, well, God gave us this land because of Muhammad, so we've got a godly right to fight you. And the poor Christians are just kind of stuck over there in the middle like they don't know what to do. You know what I mean? And, you know, holy war, right? Those were holy wars. Defend what God had given them. And, you know, even up to the Crusades, that stuff existed, the idea of holy wars. You know, we can go fight people and kill people because we got a mandate from God, because God promised us this, and if we're going to take it. So, but God promised it to them if they would do what God told them to do, which they didn't. So that broke the covenant. So God had he didn't have a horse in the race. He didn't care at that point. He's like, you guys have done evil. You've done everything I told you not to do. My covenant's broke. I gave you the land, but I'm not going to keep it for you because you've messed up. So at that point, God was like, all right, let them other nations teach you a lesson. And that's what he tried to do with them nations, to teach them a lesson. And then they would turn back to God, and then next day they would turn away from God, and a nation would come beat them down, and then, right? And then it just continually went downhill. So when you get to Solomon, you got the biggest kingdom that it ever was, united under King Solomon. And once Solomon died, this is when you fall into this chaos, this chaotic state that's going to end badly for everyone. Thanks for your time, Stephen.